Apparently, Elden Ring fits within a lot of Miyazaki's classic tropes. Such tropes are in turn clearly derived from his Japanese culture, no matter how enamored with Western European fantasy the man might be. In fact, since the very different conception of the divine in the Far East, their trademark trope, so common in fact that has become the subject of jokes, of killing the gods sounds very differently to a Japanese audience, since their history has seen the vast majority of rulers fashioning themselves as gods. While killing a god sounds like a metaphysical impossibility to Westerners, it is more akin to denouncing and overthrowing any false regime for a Japanese. Yet, despite the fact that Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring all see the main character indulging in multiple acts of deicide, the mere act of rebelling against authority and its dogma is never the conclusion of Miyazaki's narrative. In fact, it's the beginning. The conclusion is always a matter of interpretation and is, in fact, the fruit of a collective philosophical labor that in no small part creates the very meaning it's trying to uncover. And willingly so, since the author always favors to blur the line between the writer and the reader. With that in mind, what appears to be the overlying theme of Elden Ring? The story begins with a clear premise. The ring, the very embodiment of the logic of the world, has been fractured. The collective mission of our lineage, the Tarnished, is to return to the kingdom where it is kept, find Queen Marika, claim her as our bride, and rebuild the ring. But what is the ring, really? And does it make sense to rebuild it? In this first part, we seek to answer this last question. What binds religious thought and rational thought? According to many, one is a precursor to the other. Teleological reasoning, every existing thing has an author and a purpose, represents, according to Telmo Piovani, a clear evolutionary advantage. Better to believe that a phenomenon, such as a broken branch, has a cause, for example, a tiger passing by, and a meaning, such as discourage us from taking the given path, than to take a more skeptical and perhaps more rational stance. For example, I don't know why the branch is broken, and it might not mean anything. That leads me to take extra risks, such as it happened to be a tiger's doing after all. Teleological thinking was not a path for the truth, but serves as a path to avoid being eaten. Furthermore, for Yuval Noah Harari, ascribing such causes and purposes to some supernatural agent, such as the god of the valley curses with his fierce tiger minions those who travel the roads by the broken branches, allows for the construction of myths and rituals that make communication between strangers easier and viral, expanding communities far beyond the family unit, religious narrative being thus another advantage in social evolution. The Middle Ages scholar and popularizer Alessandro Barbero calls the Middle Ages an era in love with rationality, where people saw reality as worthy of intelligent observation, for it was the result of intelligent design, which in turn is guarantee of the existence of a logic beyond reality. Such perspective will persist through the Renaissance and up to Newton, and then Leibniz, and then Gödel. In short, religious thought is a primitive, evolutionary stage of thought that it will later shed to walk on its own feet. It makes reality more intriguing by painting it with an easy-to-communicate narrative. However, there are some who would disagree with this evolutionary role of religion. That is, roughly speaking, every religious person in the world. To many, the notion that numinous thought is only a rudiment of epistemology is distressing, if not terrifying. They learn to stick a narrative upon reality, and they don't want to part with it. In Elden Ring, the venerable and ever-brilliant Gold Mask is the devotee par excellence, a paragon mythicized by all others. The ascetic philosopher lives by austere and minimalist tenets, but is full of disciples who follow and adore. Or so it would seem. Truth be told, the disciples are said to forsake him, and in the scene of his death in the intro cinematic, he is holding a chalice, raising suspicion of poisoning. It's questionable what teachings these disciples found so enlightening, too. As the prophets of the greater will, the creatures called Two Fingers, Gold Mask also communicates with minute finger vibrations that must be translated by scribes with Carthusian devotion. Is he really saying anything at all? Taking the Miyazakian poetics of silence to the absurd, Gold Mask is one of his wisest and most profound characters, and yet he just never ever says one word. It may be, as his latest student, Corin, will eventually try to suggest, that he was actually nothing but a fool whose silence has no meaning whatsoever. Ironically, something one could say of Hidetaki Miyazaki himself. Corin, a guy who seems to act quite literally according to the old proverb that has the fool looking at the wise man's finger, and not at what the finger points to. Such a person could indeed be following an idiot, overinterpreting his extravagance and imagining that flickers of an old man's finger are sibylline insights on existential meaning. Then, of course, it would not be difficult to imagine the questions that make Gold Mask ponder and ruminate. How can the very logic of the world, as described by the Golden Order and its fundamentalists, a term that indicates, in this case, not extremists but scholars of fundamental notions, have such catastrophic flaws? The world of Elden Ring has collapsed, and curses, disease, and violence are rampant. How could this happen? What is the truth behind the order? Why does Gold Mask attract the hatred of his disciples? What does he seek in the depths of the laws of causality and regress? A constant in Elden Ring is that we see characters attributing intentions and judgments to simple causal effects. They tend to stick a narrative upon reality. The Nox have been punished with Astal, but on closer inspection, from the Japanese translation of its name, the unwanted child of the stars, the bastard spawn, the creature is more of an unwanted result of their careless astronomical experiments. Those who live in death are considered evil and plague-ridden, but they are only the result, Rogier says, of a logical flaw, the effect of the contamination of the rune of death, spreading in a world where nothing can truly die, which changes the nature of death, flame, into life, roots. As such, those who live in death are not contagious by intention, but by nature, as any human infected with a pathogen would be. The Omen appear as savage and violent beings, but that is only because they are the result of Queen Marika's attempt to civilize primordial humans who, with a nod to the themes of Bloodborne and Dark Souls, have a deep, bestial, draconic nature that cannot be separated from them without corrupting them. They almost are a metaphor for neuroses and alienation. All the other outer gods receive attributed personalities and intentions. For Mog, the Blood Mother, is the welcoming mother he never had. For Shabriri, the flame of frenzy brings salvation from pain. For Gowri, the Scarlet Rot is a goddess whose love and recognition he pleads for. But on closer inspection, these are nothing but projections, false narratives. No outer god appears directly or gives instructions, or so much as a single spoken or written line. They seem to express no intention other than to follow their nature. They manifest themselves with proliferation of plants and fungi, spores and roots, with a behavior has traits of Shinto deities, Platonic ideas, and Jungian archetypes. Surely nothing like personalized and thinking deities like, say, the Olympus pantheon. And since every outer god appears linked to natural concepts, of capital importance is the existence of an outer god of death. It's almost certain that Miyazaki used a Lovecraftian theme such as outer God to deliberately mislead us, as no outer God in Lovecraft's sense could even live in harmony with nature, let alone be a part of it. Since most of these concepts appear extremely unpleasant, death, despair, sickness, wounds, it's likely they were arbitrarily banished by the various wielders of the Elden Ring and could very well be restored, as it indeed happens in the game with death. They are outer to the current logic of the world. But you can find a God that dictates instructions, indeed, and is never defined an outer God, the greater will. But whatever or whoever this is, this entity acts on multiple worlds and appears detached and distant from all of them. If Inya is correct in saying that the greater will might answer to the two fingers in at least thousands of moons, meaning if it's true that they use light for communication, that the greater will is hundreds of light years far from the lands between. So it's hard to decipher what truly interests the greater will. Its instructions seemingly require that there's a lineage of women who can carry, in their womb perhaps, the seed of this entity, the Elden beast, and therefore the Elden ring, a manifestation of order incarnate. Since we couldn't even exist without that order, this god appears as a relatively benign Lovecraftian god. It's entirely indifferent and amoral, and cares only to spread itself and not one iota about the misery it leaves in its chosen worlds. Its only desire is to spread order, meaning to spread itself. However, if you want a god with human intentions and desires, you'll find one. Marika, albeit a god by designation, not by birth. Paying the price of being forever incubators of the ring, the goddess Queen Mother is both the Jesus and the Mary to the greater will's Jehovah. Just as a theological character known as Jesus could improve and update the covenant between humanity and Jehovah, so Marika and her consort can modify and improve the logic of the world. Indeed, each new goddess and each new lord are ingredients of constant enrichment, like a long and complex process of alchemical refinement. Even the succession of characters traces some of the symbolism. Glomide Queen equals Negredo. Marika equals Cintrinitis. Renala equals Albedo. Radagon equals Rubedo. To finally create the ideal Rebus, the androgynous Michaela, in an increasingly ordered, defined, and perfect world. There is a flaw in this order, for Radagon does not enrich Marika. He is an emanation of Marika herself, an alter ego of her that acts and thinks for itself, like the two D brothers, Darian and Devon. They have two bodies and two minds, but one soul. Radagon is Marika, an ineffable sentence that cannot ever be fully understood. But that surely portrays a clear dualism. Two opposite and irreconcilable wills. A masculine woman who brings stability, security, and order, and a feminine man who seeks sensitivity, understanding, and progress. Human nature is always dual, unsolved, divided, in conflict with itself. This is the secret that will suggest a solution to Goldmask, or rather clarify the problem for him. The unreliability of human gods creates instability in ideology, and ultimately, from the Japanese, we don't need human gods. While the ending with the mending runes of the Dung Eater and Fia each resolve only one of the specific internal persecutions by the Golden Order, of the Omen and of those who live in death. The ending obtained with Goldmask's mending rune is considered the most profound and positive because it eradicates the problem. Divine law is nobody's property, as it is just the natural logic of things. And since what is inserted into the Elden Ring becomes true, it is enough to implement into the Elden Ring the notion of transcendent ideology, whereby the law is sufficient unto itself, an intrinsic law of reality without the need of narratives or judgments. After all, fundamentalism is mostly notions of mathematics and mechanics, the very effort to define these fundamental laws of cause and effect. It comes to mind again Harari, who once said, "The history of the universe was a continuation from a history of physics, then chemistry, then biology, and finally history proper, human history." So, if causality is the law by which everything in an effect of another, regress tells us that everything wants to return to that origin through the pull of meaning. To understand the world, Goldmask does not want to assign human desires to divine beings, but to return to the basics, to mathematics, to a world of causes and consequences. We might question Goldmask's ethical approach. Not everything is simply fact. Indeed, perhaps there is no such thing as value-free fact. To crystallize the rules of the world forever without being able to change them is to attribute intrinsic value to them as stable and certain. For example, Goldmask laments the persecutions that have become customary within the outer order, and yet it's not his mending rune that alters the status of the persecuted. Then again, one could argue that choice is the only one possible. If one could write down the physical and metaphysical rules of the world, whatever they may be, they can always appear arbitrary and unjust. Gravity might appear discriminating to all people of heavy build. The discomfort caused by cold would appear sadistic to those who happen to be born in the north. In fact, an animal with fangs is a tyrant to any herbivore. At the core, death itself is the mother of all unjust penances, and it's not a mere whim that had Marika remove it. If one could hold the realm of reality, rewrite its intrinsic laws, no choice will ever be fair beyond scrutiny. Indeed, it is removing the possibility of rewriting them, the only solution, which can be summarized into, we do not need human gods. If the Elden Ring is the essential truth of the world, as it is a physical, interactable manifestation of its logic, the game's theme might be, what can man do when it finally comes into contact with the truth they so much crave? Goldmask appears to be the first and most sensible answer. The truth only has value if it's not arbitrary. So, as unfair as it might appear, we must take one truth as it is, accept the world as it is, study it instead of trying to bend it to our irrational desires. Coherently, if the Elden Ring is a customizable totem of truth, the only reasonable customization is removing any possibility to customize it. Goldmask is the thinker, the one who has the courage to shed the reality of its narrative, to make the steps from religious thought to logical and finally almost scientifical. But the game does not back down from pessimism. The fate of those who take such a path is to incur the wrath of their so-called disciples, eager for a word of truth, but indignant and furious as soon as they receive it. No one wants to return to mathematics and cast aside the narrative. Goldmask, after all, has learned not to speak. Is this his final wisdom, or an admission of surrender?
I can't believe you've come all this way. Are the rhythms and calculus of the Master's finger betray a suspicion of the holism of the Golden Order? A conceit, I am afraid, that cannot be overlooked. But how could this be? I dread to even entertain the possibility, but somehow I cannot cast aside my doubts about the Master. Tell me, have I simply lost my head? Only, if the Master were true to the Golden Order, why would he think to breach this forbidden mount of fire?